After all the care I've given, I never expected depression to emerge from this house. If someone mentally ill comes from our home, it affects our reputation. Susan, my mother-in-law, said, leaving me speechless. I've devoted myself to this family, enduring every harsh treatment and venting from my husband, all for the sake of this household and my daughter. I never imagined it would end like this. I signed the divorce papers handed to me, overwhelmed by the thought of not seeing my daughter again, tears streaming down my face. More than a decade passed. Holding on to the belief that I would see my daughter again, I started to adapt to a new environment and began to move on from the past. Then one day, a woman came into the beauty salon where I worked. Her elegant demeanor and kind, polite way of speaking were unforgettable. I realized it was Susan, the same person who had driven me out of the house that day. However, this time, Susan looked at me with a face full of regret, a stark contrast to before. I wondered what had happened. Staring at me directly, Susan began to speak. My name is Sarah. I'm 45, working at a beauty salon. Given the number of vocational schools and high schools around, we get a lot of young clients. Perhaps that's why the other hairstylists are younger than me. My earnings are on the lower side, but interacting with so many customers is something I cherish. Even if it means living a modest life with little income, I don't mind. After the last customer leaves and my colleagues happily gather to chat, I quickly finish up and leave the workplace as if escaping. Good work today, I say in a brief farewell, nodding slightly. I can't help but feel that the laughter in the distance, seemingly directed at me, is real. It's understandable to be laughed at. Amidst the hard-working 20-somethings, there's me, in my 40s. Yet, I'm grateful to be in the same profession as the person I admire. Even if I'm overshadowed by the younger ones, I won't be discouraged. As usual, I rush to the supermarket during the same time slot. Buying pre-made food and heading home has become my daily routine. I don't have friends, nor do I have parents or relatives to rely on. Still, I've never felt dissatisfied with my daily life. However, occasionally, the thought of my precious child makes my heart ache. Not all memories are pleasant, most are painful and distressing. But just having my child made me feel happy. I was abandoned by my parents in my early childhood and was left in a children's home until I was old enough to understand my situation. I was taken in by foster parents without ever knowing what my real parents looked like, living a vague life until then. My kind and compassionate foster parents raised me as their own daughter. They owned one of the few beauty salons in the area and were well-loved hairstylists among the locals. Many customers visited the salon just to see my foster father, Charles, whose cheerful smile brightened everyone's day. Having Charles cut my hair was something I treasured above all. He taught me the warmth of human connection, something I had never known from my own parents. Gradually, I aspired to become a hairstylist admired by people, just like Charles. Time passed, and I went on to beauty school, thrilled that I was following in Charles's footsteps. I'm so happy my daughter has chosen the same path, Charles said, smiling broadly and nodding in approval, a moment I'll never forget. My foster parents strongly supported my dream, just like real parents would. During beauty school, I worked hard, studying diligently and putting in great effort. I won many awards in contests and even secured a job at a salon in the city after graduation. My parents were delighted when I started working in the city. A year and a half into my job, I had gotten used to the work and started to have regular clients who specifically asked for me. I aimed to be a hairstylist like Charles, practicing diligently every day. By then, I had become proficient in cutting and styling hair on my own when Susan, a regular client, approached me with a request. She wanted me to meet her son. Susan, known for her elegance, had been a standout client among the hairstylists. She had been reserving haircuts and styling sessions every 2 weeks and had chosen me as her stylist from the time I started working as a newcomer. Known for her clear and sometimes strict way of speaking, many hairstylists had changed hands before me. However, it seemed she particularly enjoyed talking to me. "My son, you see, is in his 20s but hasn't been able to find a partner for marriage," she sighed, seemingly stressed about getting her son married soon. However, every match seemed to fail due to compatibility issues. Susan had 3 sons, with the eldest already married and involved in Susan's trading company. The second son had found someone while working at a major corporation and was already engaged. But the youngest son was still unmarried and living at home. He had attended top schools for high school and university but had not secured a job after failing employment exams. This failure had deeply affected him, increasing his time at home, and now Susan was supporting him. "He's always been frail since childhood and needs constant care. He says he'll work when he gets better. What do you think?" She expressed her concern about her son being alone at home. She was looking for someone to support him, but finding the right person was challenging. However, I had no plans for marriage or even a desire to start a relationship. Meeting her son seemed pointless to me. I brushed off the conversation, trying to avoid the topic. But every time Susan visited the salon, she would bring up her youngest son, making it harder for me to refuse. Eventually, I agreed to meet him, and Susan's home was chosen as the meeting place. With nervous anticipation, I headed to the address she had given me. Upon arriving at the given address, I was greeted by a mansion unlike anything I'd ever seen. "Been waiting for you. Please come in." Susan welcomed me, revealing that the mansion belonged to a descendant of a wealthy trader. I was astounded, having never imagined Susan lived in such a grand mansion, and she seemed amused by my surprise. As I entered, the vastness of the mansion's interior, with hallways wide enough for 2 adults to walk side by side comfortably, made me stop in awe. My attention was caught by a room decorated with vivid colors, notably a dress adorned with red flowers. Intrigued, I paused to admire the dress. And Susan, noticing my interest, pointed it out, saying, "That dress has been passed down in this house for generations." She looked at the dress fondly, then ushered me into the room, where a handsome man was present. Our eyes met, but he quickly looked away, his demeanor somewhat aloof. This was David, Susan's son. I entered the room nervously, trying to initiate conversation. David responded minimally, showing little interest in my words. Susan, sitting beside David, looked at me with joy, suggesting, "With someone as reliable as you, I believe David will do well. What do you think?" Considering I had no plans for romance or marriage, the idea of a convenient arrangement where I wouldn't struggle for necessities seemed tempting. A life where everything I wanted or needed was readily available without effort appeared quite appealing. Despite my initial light-hearted thoughts, the discussion progressed, and we quickly became engaged. While David's aloofness worried me, the prospect of a financially secure life was comforting. Indeed, after marriage, I never faced financial difficulties, enjoyed a comfortable life, and surprisingly felt happy. With all household chores handled by others, I could focus on my work, finding little to complain about, though reality was harsh. David became my sole concern after marriage. From the matchmaking, David showed no interest in me and became even more indifferent once we started living together. "I'm going out," he would say, and his absences from home became more frequent, often not being there even after I returned from work. When I asked where he had been, David's response was vague, and sometimes he didn't reply at all. "Why don't we go out together on the weekend?" "Why do I have to go out specifically with you? I want to live my life my way." "Don't bother me," he would retort and leave the house, usually heading to a casino in the entertainment district. David seemed more stressed after marriage, his behavior worsening by the day. "I don't want to be tied down by marriage. You're no different from a housekeeper to me," he once coldly remarked, leaving me saddened. Yet, I continued as his wife, learning etiquette and manners from Susan, living each day in this new role. After about 6 months of living this way, David began to spend nights away from home, returning only once every 3 days, spending most of his other time at bars in the entertainment district. I heard this from a colleague at work. While my coworkers envied my life, I gradually felt less and less happy. Waiting for a husband who wouldn't return, being drilled in strict etiquette. I couldn't tarnish David's name and strive to learn and adapt despite falling ill from the stress. One day, noticing my heightened sensitivity to smells and nausea, I rushed to the hospital the next day, worried about a possible illness. After seeing a general practitioner, I was referred to the obstetrics and gynecology department, where I was told I was 3 months pregnant. The news thrilled me, but one concern lingered. David's nearly non-existent communication with me and his general unresponsiveness. The thought of him not being home even after the child's birth filled me with anxiety. I reported back to Susan immediately after returning home, sharing the news of my 3-month pregnancy. She was delighted at the prospect of a grandchild. Although the baby's gender was not yet determined, she was genuinely happy about the pregnancy. Hesitantly, I also shared the news with David, who surprisingly took it well. "So, you're pregnant? Well, that secures the future of this house," he remarked, his tone indifferent but noticeably lighter than usual. Despite this, I was happy and continued to care deeply for our child in my womb. But such happiness was only fleeting. As I basked in the joy of David and Susan's happiness about the pregnancy, David's demeanor drastically changed when we found out the baby was a girl, having hoped for a boy. Shocked by this revelation, my health worsened, leading to my resignation from work. Taking care of David's needs in my idle time probably wasn't wise, as he felt more constrained and became even harsher towards me. Despite the financial security, the realization that David was the father of my unborn child weighed heavily on me, his cold treatment making me feel like a mere housekeeper. "Didn't I tell you to iron this? Why haven't you done it? Useless woman!" he would yell, instilling fear in me. Nevertheless, my daughter Barbara grew healthily inside me. And despite David not being present at the birth, Susan supported me. "Just remember, you did well," she comforted me. Life became hectic after Barbara's arrival, with nightly cries and frequent demands for milk depleting my energy. One night, while half asleep nursing Barbara, I was awakened by David's shouting. "It's too noisy every single night." He complained about being unable to sleep due to Barbara's cries. I apologized immediately, but his anger didn't subside. And soon I felt a strong impact on my cheek, realizing seconds later I had been hit. As pain set in and my body trembled with fear, I kept apologizing, trying to appease David's temper. However, David remained in a foul mood, slapping my cheek again while I held Barbara, then returning to bed. The pain from the slap on my sleep-deprived body began to hurt, and tears overflowed. I regretted how lightly I had taken marriage at that time. How long would this marriage last? Feeling a sense of despair, I tried to regain my composure, thinking I just had to make it until Barbara's birthday party was over. Yet, passing that room always excited me, because it was a rule to wear that beautiful dress at the birthday party. Perhaps wearing that dress, feeling accepted in this house for Barbara and myself, had become my solace. Disappointing them by not having a boy, I couldn't afford any more mistakes. Susan persuaded David to attend the birthday party. From that day on, I decided to focus more on household duties. But my resolve did nothing to change David's harsh treatment of me or his growing hostility towards our child. Why did you have to be a girl? A useless woman is of no use to me. I'm sorry. Please don't take it out on Barbara. I pleaded, enduring David's violence to protect Barbara. This went on for 3 years. It was a day like any other when I collapsed the day before Barbara's 3rd birthday. The unbearable stress and exhaustion from childcare took its toll, and I lost consciousness while playing with Barbara. Susan noticed immediately and called an ambulance to take me to the hospital, where I was diagnosed with overwork. Recalling David's violence when asked if there was any stress at home made me realize I had reached my limit. I was hospitalized without being able to wish Barbara a happy birthday. Leaving my dear daughter behind, I repeatedly asked Susan if she was doing well during her visits. Reassured by Susan's positive responses, I longed to see my daughter and hoped for an early discharge. Yet, the thought of returning to that house also filled me with dread. The doctor seemed to suspect something upon seeing the bruises on my body, and decided to extend my hospital stay by 2 months for depression treatment, leading to a prolonged and tedious hospitalization. In the end, without being able to return home, I continued my hospital stay alone, holding on to my loneliness and anxiety. David seemed indifferent to my hospitalization, never visiting me once. Susan's visits were the only comfort I thought I had. But I was mistaken. One day, Susan came with fruits and sweets, as usual, responding to my usual inquiries about Barbara with a deep sigh. She then took out a piece of paper. It was a divorce application with David's name already filled in. "Why would you bring such a thing?" I asked, bewildered, as Susan, with a serious face, handed me the divorce application and sighed deeply. "I never thought someone from this house would end up with depression after all the care I've taken," she said, leaving me shocked. I couldn't understand why she would say such a thing. I had endured violence from David and followed all the house's rules, bearing everything. And this was how I was repaid? "It's a mistake, isn't it? Please tell me it is," I pleaded, shaking my head slowly as she pushed the pen towards me. "Sign it," she demanded sternly, leaving me speechless. But then I thought of my daughter, Barbara. "What about Barbara?" I asked, to which Susan replied with something unbelievable. "We'll take good care of her. We can't leave her with someone mentally ill like you," she said coldly, draining the color from my face. Overpowered by Susan's domineering gaze, I signed the divorce application. Susan, stating she would never let me see Barbara again, left the hospital room with the application. All that was left for me was an arranged apartment and a photo of my daughter. I cried endlessly, thinking about my daughter whom I would never see again. After a long 2 months in the hospital, I stepped outside for the first time, lost without a home and headed to the apartment Susan had arranged. The thought of the future was daunting. Living alone and returning to work brought immense stress due to unfamiliar environments, and my inability to communicate well, likely a result of David's violence. Realizing this, I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Gradually, I started avoiding people, and years passed by. Finally, I settled into my current job and got used to interacting with others. Just as I was about to take my lunch break one day, I received a last-minute appointment. Normally, I would have already been on break, but I decided to prepare for the haircut instead. I was told the client was an elegant white-haired lady, which was unusual for me. Facing the client, I felt a sense of familiarity, but couldn't place her. As we made eye contact while I prepared for the cut, it hit me. The only person it could be was Susan. Despite a few more wrinkles, it was undeniably her. Bringing back all those memories and sending a chill down my spine. I pretended not to recognize her and proceeded with the haircut. "Are you going somewhere after this?" I asked, trying hard to hide my nervousness. Susan took out a photo from her pocket, looking at me with a face full of regret. "I'm taking a photo with my granddaughter tomorrow. Would you like to see a picture of her?" she said, handing me the photo. To my surprise, the photo showed a beautiful young woman. And then, I realized the dress she was wearing in the photo was the same one I wore for Barbara's birthday party when she was still small. "Wait, this dress?" I marveled at the beautiful red dress. I could never forget the day I wore that magnificent dress. The day I took photos holding my precious daughter. As the memories flooded back, I turned to Susan, who nodded silently, her eyes brimming with tears. I understood then that the woman in the photo had grown up to be Barbara. Stunned, I listened as Susan deeply apologized for separating Barbara and me when she was young. I wanted to know more about Barbara. We agreed to meet after work. Susan waited quietly until I was done. And we went to a nearby coffee shop. As we talked for the first time in over a decade, Susan revealed that after the divorce, no one could stop David's whims, leading him to act out more freely. Losing me as an outlet for his frustration, he even attempted to direct his anger towards Barbara, prompting Susan to cut ties with him. I was shocked to hear this from Susan, who had always supported David. Since then, Susan had taken on the role of Barbara's mother, trying to provide her with everything, though Barbara rejected all material offerings. "Everything is there, but not parents," Barbara had said sadly, making Susan realize her mistakes, including restricting others' freedom. Thinking about Barbara, who had lost both her parents, Susan searched for me to apologize for everything. 10 years flew by, and Barbara turned 20. "I was wrong back then. I'm so sorry. I never realized how much I was hurting Barbara and you." Susan expressed regret for not seeing each other's perspective, acknowledging our mutual faults. I had taken marriage too lightly, hoping for a carefree life, without protecting my family or standing up to David. I also had my failings for leaving Barbara in Susan's care without considering her well-being. I thanked Susan for raising Barbara with such care. Showing me the photo was Susan's way of thinking about Barbara's wish to meet me, searching for me on her behalf. It was Susan's initiative that enabled the reunion with my daughter, Barbara. But not only Susan, Barbara also cherished the clothes I left behind and had been searching for me. "Mom left me and went away." She felt lonely from a young age, but grew to wish to meet her mom as an adult. Susan had avoided talking about me in front of Barbara, but decided to act on Barbara's request, even showing her the birthday party photos and revealing my face. Knowing Barbara went to such lengths to find me was heartbreaking. At that time, I was so overwhelmed with my own issues that I couldn't properly offer love. This concern had always been on my mind. Yet, seeing a photo of my grown-up precious daughter made me well up with tears. Then, the next day during my lunch break, Susan unexpectedly called. Worried about what might have happened, I was instead told to come to a certain place. Recalling Susan's words from the day before, I hurriedly left work in my colleague's hands and headed to the designated location. It was a party venue I arrived at. Scanning the crowd inside, I moved forward and spotted Susan by a less crowded wall, with another woman beside her. I instantly knew it was my daughter, Barbara. "Mom?" Barbara, unable to hide her surprise, saw me and immediately ran towards me, tears streaming down her face, not caring about her disheveled dress. I wiped away the makeup-smeared tears from Barbara's beautifully made-up face and hugged her tightly as she clung to me. The tiny body I remembered had grown to nearly my height. Feeling Barbara's growth in my arms brought tears to my eyes as well. "I've always wanted to see you. I've been searching for you, Mom." "I've always wanted to see you too. You've grown so much. I'm sorry for leaving you alone. I'm sorry for making you feel lonely." "It's okay now. Because I finally got to see Mom. We'll always be together from now on." Barbara showed me the same adorable smile she had as a little girl. Telling her we would always be together, I kept hugging her, trying to make up for the time we couldn't see each other. Then, from a distance, I heard voices calling Barbara. I nudged her towards a circle of friends. And she shyly smiled back at us, waving her hand. Before running off to join them at the venue. I watched her go, waving back and memorizing the sight of my grown daughter. Seeing this, Susan and I couldn't help but smile with satisfaction. Later, I moved in with Susan and Barbara, and we began living together as a family. Barbara, having heard from Susan that I was a hairstylist, aspired to follow in my footsteps. I started teaching her everything about hairstyling. Dreaming of one day running a salon together, envisioning a happy future.